It is Sunday. That means it's time for another edition of the Resume Ranking, which kind of is just the ranking at this point. When we started this thing at the beginning of the season, it was based strictly on what had happened this season, not on preseason hype, not on a team's reputation. Now it's just about what the team has done on the field, which is kind of what the other rankings are now too. But I've noticed in the bottom of the top 10 and the top of the 10 through 20 in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings, I don't know that they're actually looking at the resumes as closely as they should. So we'll talk about that when we get down there, but we'll start at the top because obviously there is a lot to talk about in terms of the College Football Playoff. Now, if all goes according to plan, then maybe not, but we shall see because as college football showed us on Saturday, the plans sometimes change. Number one is Georgia. Bulldogs kind of sleepy against Georgia Tech, not quite at full strength. They will be as close to full strength as they can possibly be when they play Alabama in the SEC championship game. I expect a different looking team in Atlanta this time than the one that was in Atlanta yesterday. So a couple miles away, I imagine Georgia looks a little bit different when they play the Tide, but we will get to a little more about that game when we talk about Alabama and where they are on this list. Number 2, Michigan. The Wolverines beat Ohio State. They're going to play Iowa for the Big Ten title. If they win, they're in the college football playoff. They will either be the 1 or the 2 seed, depending on what happens in Georgia and Alabama. I realize I should probably say what might happen if Iowa wins, but I find it very hard to wrap my brain around that concept. So congratulations to the Wolverines. And going to be really awkward if Michigan wins and Tony Petitti, the commissioner of the Big Ten, has to hand Jim Harbaugh that trophy. That's going to be quite a scene. Number 3, Washington. Great win against Oregon. Undefeated. If they win against Oregon in Vegas, they are in. The problem is if you've watched Oregon and Washington lately, Oregon looks better. Now, they've already played and Washington won. They have to play again. It doesn't matter how they've looked between now and then. It only matters what happens when they play on the field. Oregon is a favorite in this game in Las Vegas for the Pac-12 championship, the last Pac-12 game in the Pac-12 as we know it. That said, Washington beat them the first time. Washington could win this thing again. If Washington wins, Washington is in the playoff. There will be no debate about that. Easy, easy. If Oregon wins, well, we'll talk about that when we get to the Ducks. But first, we got to talk about Florida State. The Seminoles, first game without Jordan Travis as their starter. Tate Rodemaker comes in. It took him a little while to get going against Florida. Florida State had to come back at the end to beat Florida. It was not a pretty game, but they won. Now Florida State moves on to the ACC championship game against Louisville, which face-planted against Kentucky on Saturday, which doesn't help the conference at all. That said, Florida State wins 13-0. They should be in the college football playoff. As long as Georgia beats Alabama, I don't foresee a scenario where a 13-0 Florida State gets left out. Now, that probably means there's a scenario where a 12-1 Big 12 champ Texas gets left out in favor of Florida State. But the committee's just going to go, they were undefeated. Texas would have made it next year. We've already moved on to the 12 team. Blame the Alliance for not doing the 12 team this year. At least that's what I would say. I don't know if that's what Boo Corrigan's going to say. But that's where Florida State's at. I do not think they're going to leave them out unless they're in a situation where they have to judge them against Georgia. That's the problem for anybody who's kind of right on the cusp, is getting judged against Georgia. Because if Georgia were to lose to Alabama and you're sitting there with a 12-1 Georgia, all of the power rankings, Vegas, all of the committee members in their minds and in their eye tests are going to go, yeah, but the Bulldogs can beat all these teams. That's what they're going to say. So if you're a Florida State fan, root for the Noles, root for the Bulldogs. You should be fine in that case. Number 5, Texas. Obviously, huge Louisville fans this week. Huge Louisville fans. Huge Oregon fans too, but I don't know that Oregon helps you because Oregon probably just replaces Washington in the top 4. Although Texas versus Oregon in the top 4 with Texas holding that win against Alabama would be very helpful. What's interesting for Texas is if Alabama beats Georgia, that also could pull Texas up because Texas has a head-to-head win against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And the committee can go through all the mental gymnastics it wants to, saying, well, Alabama's different. Texas is different. Alabama just beat Georgia. They still played. They would still have the same record. Texas won in Tuscaloosa. That's where this gets really fascinating. So if that happens, I would think Texas is in the playoff. If Florida State loses Louisville and Texas beats Oklahoma State, Texas is in the playoff. Now, what's interesting about Texas is you watch them play on Friday and you say, oh my God, they can beat any team in this thing. Any of them. They don't play like that every week. So you don't know which Texas you're going to get. But if you get that version of Texas in the Big 12 championship game, if that's the last vision of Texas that the committee sees, it's going to be a tough decision for the committee. Unless Alabama beats Georgia, then it's probably an easy one because Texas beat Alabama. We'll see what happens. Number 6, I've got Oregon. The Ducks favored to beat Washington this week. The way they've been playing, as I said earlier, they've been better recently than Washington. It doesn't matter, though. They have to beat them on the field. They tried 3 4th downs in critical situations last time against Washington, got stuffed every time. They got to get 1 or 2 of those this time. Or maybe leave no doubt. They've been leaving no doubt in their games recently. Washington has been leaving doubt. So we're going to find out how much these teams have changed, evolved, how different they are since that first meeting. And oh, by the way, neutral site this time instead of in Seattle. Number 7, Alabama. The Crimson Tide needed an absolute miracle to win the Iron Bowl. A miracle. It was the second miracle at Jordan-Hare. The first miracle at Jordan-Hare helped Auburn, 2013 against Georgia. But this one, Alabama was dead. Their playoff hopes were cooked. And then they won the game. Jalen Milroe, Isaiah Bond. Remember 2 years ago, Alabama needed 4 overtimes to beat a pretty meh Auburn team in the Iron Bowl in Jordan-Hare. What did they do the following week in Atlanta? They beat the eventual national champion Georgia, and it wasn't particularly close. So we've seen this happen before. The gap between this Georgia team and this Alabama team doesn't feel that different than it felt then. This is a really fascinating game. And as I said earlier, it can really mess up everything else, make the committee's life very difficult on Sunday. So I'm sure the committee's saying, please, Georgia, win this so we can make easy decisions. Because if Alabama wins, it gets kind of complicated. Number 8, Ohio State. The Buckeyes are stuck here. There's really nothing they can do about this. Unlike last year, there's not really a path back into the top 4. So they got to sit there and wear that Michigan loss. Because remember, playing Georgia in the Peach Bowl reframed things for the Buckeyes. And you can say, oh, well, you lost to the team that won the national title. There's no shame in that. And if you'd beaten them, which really, if they'd gotten one more stop late in the game, they would have beaten them. Ohio State probably would have beaten TCU for the national title. And so you could really rationalize away what happened against Michigan and Columbus last year. But you can't rationalize away what happened against Michigan in Ann Arbor on Saturday because there's not going to be that opportunity. Ohio State's going to go to a New Year's Six Bowl. The team's going to look completely different. The best players may not play. It's just going to be a really sour end. And they've got to sit there and think about losing to Michigan over and over and over again. And that's just where they are. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. So if you look at the committee rankings, you see Missouri, you see Penn State. I think Missouri, Penn State, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss are all fairly similar in terms of record, resume, everything. So how do we parse these guys? Because you got to put them in some order, and the order that they get put in by the committee is going to determine who plays in New Year's Six games and who doesn't. Next year, it would determine who actually makes the playoff and who doesn't. I think Oklahoma has the best resume of this group, so I think Oklahoma should be at number 9. They have the best win against Texas, that SMU win looking nicer and nicer as the Mustangs prepare to play for the American Championship. Oklahoma seems to be coming on at the right time. They've been really good offensively lately. So I think Oklahoma probably is the best choice of these four, yet the committee disagrees completely. And I do wonder, will they have a reevaluation of all these teams either for this ranking or for the final one? Remember back in 2014 when they had TCU ranked above Baylor over and over and over again, and then before the final ranking, they went, wait a second, they have the same record and they played and Baylor won. Why are we doing this? And they moved Baylor ahead of TCU, which was the right choice. But it took them until the final ranking to do that. So they do, like they say, they start with a clean sheet of paper. If they start with a clean sheet of paper 2 more times, you may see Oklahoma move up. Penn State, I think, is the fourth of those 4 teams. So they're not going to be my number 10. I think they probably should be beneath Ole Miss and Missouri. The question is, who's higher, Ole Miss or Missouri? And it is a pretty tight call. Both 10-2, both play in the SEC. They both played Georgia. Missouri was more competitive. Ole Miss got blown out. But they both played LSU. Ole Miss won. Missouri didn't. Close game. Could have gone either way, but Missouri throws a pick 6 at the end, and they lose. Missouri has that win against K-State. Good win. Looks less good with K-State losing the snowy Farmageddon on Saturday. Ole Miss, if we go back into the annals of the early season, has that win against Tulane. Now, no Michael Pratt in that game, but the Green Wave actually have been very good. They're going to play for the American Championship next week. Their only loss is to Ole Miss. So I'm going to put Ole Miss here at number 10. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. All that matters is what the committee thinks. But I wonder if the committee actually does a real reevaluation or they just lazily put what they've been putting the last few weeks. I think they may come around to my way of thinking on this. We'll find out. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.